What's up? I'm SYROBE, and the new dual blades in Monster Hunter are wild. Kill me. Anyways, I've been speedrunning through mission ranks with the new dual blades and currently have had 0 deaths and no faints of any kind, averaging around 8 minutes per large monster clear. My dual blade setup allows me to absolutely demolish every single large monster on the first try for a completely deathless run so far. So if this was helpful, be sure to check me out live on Twitch for more Monster Hunter Wilds and early access to build previews and live theory crafting. This video will be largely spoiler free, but I will be showing minimal parts of boss fights here and there and my clear times to prove its effectiveness. First thing I want to point out is that this build is just to help clear through the early game of Monster Hunter Wilds. Most people will agree that the real game does not start until high rank bare minimum, and some even past that. So this is just my setup to get to the high rank missions as fast as possible with dual blades within the first day of release. Generally speaking, most early game builds are going to default to just highest raw damage for weapons and highest base defense for armor. But there is room for more depth to early game builds, or just using what you think looks badass is always valid too. But my build specifically focuses on insane early game DPS with 40% affinity in the early game of Monster Hunter Wilds, which affinity is essentially your critical hit rate for bonus damage, alongside high raw damage and high elemental damage with an added bonus to elemental damage whenever I crit. My early game DPS dual blades tear through all monsters thanks to the new dual blades passive known as Demon Dodge. When you perform a perfect dodge, you'll turn blue, which lets you know you successfully timed your perfect dodge and entered the Demon Dodge state, which grants you a nearly 20% increased attack buff for around 25 seconds, taking my base damage from 182 to 218, and another weapon from 168 to 202, averaging out around 20% increased attack buff. However, this didn't seem to change any elemental damage nor affinity, despite most people saying that it does. So as far as I can tell, Demon Dodge only grants a raw attack buff, which is adjusted based on your motion value and sharpness and all that other stuff, which you don't have to worry about right now. So let's get right into the best early game dual blades weapon setup to clear your way to high rank created by yours truly. Keep in mind, everything I'm about to show you is obtainable in early rank missions and is best suited just to speedrun you to the high rank missions. For weapons, this is where it's going to get a little bit more specific to what I'm doing for my deathless run so far, since the dual blades are absolutely disgusting. I've defeated every large monster first try without spending any carts. So far, it's been 100% deathless and it's not even close. The perfect demon dodge state with the iframes is super rewarding and skill expressive, which is why I opted for dual blades in the first place, because they also have insane DPS. When you first start out with dual blades, just upgrade your hope daggers and stick with those until you meet the Lalabarina boss, because once you defeat her, she will allow you to craft what is, in my opinion, the best early game dual blades known as the Barina Fossiles. Sorry if I butchered that, I only speak in the freedom language, granting you even higher DPS and a paralysis bonus. This paralysis bonus builds up the paralysis debuff, so the more you hit a target, the faster it builds up, and when it's fully built up, will completely stun lock a boss, allowing you to DPS the hell out of it for free. You know, as long as they aren't immune to paralysis. I used this until I met the other spider, Narcilla, because defeating her allows you to upgrade the Barina's Fossiles from stage 1 to the next stage 2 version. Then I used that until chapter 3, where I was able to unlock the Guild Knight Sabers 1. You'll need to visit mining outcrops in the ruins of Wyveria area to get all of the ore and crystals that you need to craft it. I like to swap my gear to the chainmail set for the max geologist bonus whenever I go mining to maximize my profits. So I highly recommend doing that before you go out. It's already a free set that you should have in your storage. And I made these weapons for a few reasons. Not only do they look like kick-ass dual-wield lightsabers, but so far it's the earliest low-rank weapon with strong raw damage, high elemental damage, and blue sharpness with a positive affinity. Blue sharpness can increase your damage as a multiplier to your raw damage and increases your elemental damage as well. Most other dual blades only get you up to green sharpness at this early in the game, so I highly valued the early blue sharpness for extra DPS and durability, plus that 10% base affinity is great because that is essentially all your critical hit chance and crit damage bonus with this weapon, which is best since you attack so fast you're rapidly proccing crits. However, I wanted to crank this crit bonus up to the max. In the early game for chapter 3, you'll start getting your first decoration gems, or decos as most people call them, which is usually just passive bonuses that can be put into empty gear slots. So in addition to the Giga DPS from the Guild Knight Sabers with the blue sharpness, they also have a deco slot, which I was lucky enough to get a random drop from a boss for bonus elemental damage whenever I critically strike an enemy, which is why the 10% wasn't enough for me, and I wanted to get as much affinity as possible possible in the early game, which leads me into the armor. For early game armor, the Hope set is perfect for the Divine Blessing level 3 buff, which is super strong until you get something that just has more consistent and higher base defense stats. Again, don't overthink the early game armor too much for now. Since I use the dual blades, I rush the Balahara set specifically for higher base defense and quick sheath passives. That allows me to take out my dual blades and put them away faster whenever I need to run around, heal, or sharpen. And my favorite bonus here was the Scaling Prowess, which makes it a lot easier to mount monsters, and then when you actually mount them, you can create wounds faster and spam multiple wounds all over their back and pop them all with your Levi Beyblade focus attack. It's super effective at min-maxing your DPS by jumping off your chocobo to aerial attack the monster, which builds up your passively hidden mount meter and allows you to mount monsters after enough hits for easy bonus damage from all those quick wounds that you can pop without much risk. Generally, I believe the Dashguma set might be one of the best early game sets and a viable option here because it's generally a really good set, but the reason I didn't use this set was because the dual blades don't have access to an offset and the dual blades don't have access to power clashing either, which is more or less the main focus of the Dashguma set. So that's why I opted for the Balahara set instead, while allowing you to create your wounds faster while on the enemy. Either set should easily carry you through the early game, and you won't be using either for long anyways. Before I ever got into high rank, this is what my build looked like. However, there's a small issue with the Rey Dau set. Just killing Rey Dau is not enough to get the entire set. You first meet Rey Dau in chapter 2, but you won't be able to craft the full set until chapter 3. You'll be introduced to a new type of enemy called a Guardian. Farming and harvesting these Guardians for their Guardian drops is how you can actually finish the Rey Dau set. So you need to make sure that you progress a little bit into chapter 3 to be able to complete the full 4-piece set bonus. That's where all of these Guardian ingredients come from. And if you're missing a Wingdrake hide like I was, you actually get these from the Wingdrake Harpios, which I found mine in the Oil Well Basin. I was able to find a lot of them in the Area 2 section specifically. I used the following for the Rey Dau set: the Rey Dau helmet, gauntlets, coil, and greaves. I didn't use the chest piece. You can use the Rey Dau chest piece if you want, but I preferred the Hirabami mail chest for slightly more iframes on our demon dodges, since you're consistently dodging whenever you're in demon mode, and the recovery speed to regen lost HP, since I figured a little goes a long way. The helmet, gauntlets, and greaves give us 1 point of latent power, which is a passive on the same set for the Rey Dau's voltage set bonus. Then I used the coil for the Rey Dau and not the chest, because neither the chest piece nor the coil had extra points for latent power, but the coil had a deco slot and the chest piece didn't. So I used the coil to finish off our 4th piece of the Rey Dau's voltage passive for the Thunderous Roar max set bonus. So what exactly is latent power? Well, for dual blades, I believe this is essential early on because the best stats you can have is always more damage. All my clears for large monsters are around 8 minutes first try on every boss with no deaths. With this setup, you get latent power level 3, which grants 30 bonus affinity, which again, to simplify, affinity is essentially just crit chance and more damage. And it also gives you 50% reduced stamina depletion, which is key for carrying your DPS through the early game bosses with dual blades. Here's a good enough summary of how latent power works. It's a buff that has no cooldown. It is activated when you either take 150 points of your health as damage, or after around 300 seconds has passed when you start a mission, whichever one happens first. Stats look like this for each level of latent power and for each level of Rey Dau's voltage. I timed all of this manually for the Rey Dau's voltage passive with Thunderous Roar because at level 1, latent power is 10% affinity per level. So your level 1 is 10% affinity for 120 seconds. If you only had that single Rey Dau's piece with the latent power on it. Then it becomes plus 20 affinity for 165 seconds with the 2-piece Rey Dau set. And lastly, the 3-piece latent power grants you bonus 30% affinity for 210 seconds, which is about 3.5 minutes, for the level 3 latent power and the 4-piece total Rey Dau set bonus. Combining that with my weapon granted me the 40% affinity bonus. These are all of the passives I have when combining my entire setup. So if you follow it exactly, yours should look something like this. I also have a build link in the description below for all the extra details that I might miss. Starting off at the top, we have Focus, which increases the fill rate for weapons with gauges. Your Demon Blade's meter will charge faster with this set bonus. Critical element comes from a deco gem that I put on my dual blades. It increases elemental damage, specifically for us, our water damage, whenever we land a critical hit, which is why the affinity is so important here, since our weapons have a base of 10 and the latent power passive gives us an additional 30%, while reducing our stamina depletion by 50%, stacking on with Constitution to reduce fixed stamina depletion by 20%, which involves things like evading or blocking. Then Evade Window comes from our chest piece, which very slightly increases your iframes on your dodges, because a little does go a long way with this perfectly timed one dodge. Divine Blessing comes from another deco slot, which has a random chance to reduce the damage I take by 15%. I have recovery up from my Hope Charm Talisman. The Hope Charm Talisman increases my recovery whenever I restore my own health, giving you extra HP when you heal, and self-improvement, so your attack and defense stats increase the more time passes on the quest. So if you ever hit a wall, this becomes more valuable. Then I have recovery speed, so after you take damage, you recover that missing HP twice as fast. Free meal is great. That's another deco slot that I have, which gives you a 10% chance to not consume any healing or consumable items when you eat them, allowing you to save your resources. And lastly, we have Rey Dau's Voltage, which ties back to latent power. Again, latent power activates after you take around 150 damage or after around 300 seconds has passed when you start a mission, whatever happens first. And since we have the 3-piece bonus that increases our affinity by 30% and reduces stamina depletion by 50%, thanks to the max bonus of Rey Dau's Voltage passive, it increases the time of your latent power skill. It's a bit poorly translated, but essentially what this means is that this goes from being 120 seconds, which is 2 minutes, to 210 seconds, which is about 3.5 minutes. A full minute and a half extension for this passive buff, allowing you to absolutely min-max your DPS. With 40% affinity, bonus elemental damage whenever you crit, and a ton of reduced stamina costs while using dual blades because your demon form eats through a lot. As you can see here, it's 182 attack with 10% base affinity, 140 water element, and up to blue sharpness with 1 deco slot. Very high value in my opinion. Again, I'll leave a link to all of this in the description below, and if you copy it exactly, you should have a bunch of stats just like this. For some final dual blade combat tips, always try to keep your blue demon dodge form up. It's a huge increase in your DPS, and I personally like to activate the blue demon dodge buff before activating any wounds for min-max damage. And personally, I like to activate the blue demon dodge buff first before I proc any wounds on an enemy for the most min-max damage. The best part is that if you fail the dodge, then you're still building up the passive for the Rey Dau crit bonus since you got hit, which puts you in a win-win scenario and allowing you to be rewarded even if you fail the dodge. But I intentionally let myself get hit at the start of the fight just to stack the passive faster. Rush in with demon mode active to build up your archdemon form. Once that blade meter gets full, you can deactivate the demon mode to regen your stamina and keep the buff. Then go back into demon mode, dodging and weaving around your boss attacks to activate the blue demon dodge form and apply the highest DPS possible by popping wounds with the blue demon mode. If you enjoyed, stay tuned for my high rank Monster Hunter Wilds guide for dual blades coming up next. I've been SYROBE, and if you want an early preview, hopefully I'll see you all live on Twitch. Peace.